thank you, Dr. Taylor and Sonia, for giving us insights into the making of the book and gathering all of the information for everyone who contributed, and also for the insights of really what goes on to putting on an exhibition, the problems and the curatorial responsibilities as well. Let's see, I think we need Arpana Caur. Wait a minute. That's it, great. Okay, so our next speaker is Arpana Caur. Arpana has flown in from India to be with us today, and I really want to introduce her both as one of the most important artists in India, but as also a very close friend. Arpana is the daughter of Ajit Singh, who is a noted Punjabi Sikh writer, and her family, her mother, have done so much for the Sikh community in India, particularly in Delhi, having themselves been sort of driven out of sort of Pakistan during the partition, coming to India, and then living through the horrors of the 1980s. And that's actually when I first met Arpana and her mother, living in a very, very small little apartment before the beautiful Sikh Heritage Foundation that you have now in India. Arpana embodies, I should say, the values of what it means to be Sikh in her daily being, in her generosity. Both she and her mother support the local Gurudwara. They take food, they make food, they look after people. They've got this educational academy in which they bring particularly young women and children of need, and educate them and teach them skills, whether this is reading or writing or actually art skills too. It's an amazing experience to visit the academy, and it's all thanks just really to the two of you. So besides just embodying Sikhism in its truest nature, I've worked with a lot of women artists, and I've brought Arpana's work to the United States, actually in the big exhibition I did, first exhibition actually on contemporary art, and of contemporary Indian art. But I want you to realize that Arpana is not just a Sikh artist by any means. She's one of India's most important artists, and not just a female feminine artist. I'm talking about all of artists. She's very well known and has exhibited throughout the world, in Germany, France, England, throughout Asia, the United States. So she is very well known, she is collected, and is one of India's top artists. We're very privileged to have her with us, and also to learn from her and looking at her art. Thank you so much for making this journey. I know it was a very long and arduous one for you, and so from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming. Please join me in welcoming Arpana.
This is a very historic moment, the 50th anniversary of the Sikh Foundation, which has grown out of one man's passion for his faith, real, unmatched passion, physically living thousands of miles away, heart all there. So, in honor of that passion, which is now supported by so many others like his own family, Raj, Kiki, Michael, people like Sonia, and to bring a non-traveler like myself here, it's that passion and love I've received. And I peeped at the book this morning, and I feel so honored that the work features there, because the book reaches many, many hands. Thank you, Dr. Kapani. And the gem of a museum that I saw yesterday for the first time, my own fault, I've been asked many times to come and could not make it for reasons of my mother's health. But it was a dream, despite many odds, to come and participate in this very glorious moment yesterday, and to see this gem of a museum of a woman who, in a woman's name, who I too loved and was loved by. I'll start with the sources of my inspiration, which is the miniatures, of course, the Janam Sakhis, and the kind of figuration that you see, and the use of color and the simplification of the figure I owe to them. This is a work of mine done 5 years ago. Saints are green. Nanak naam mileta jiva tan man thive harya. So we have in Nanak's poetry a lot of references to environment. Pavan Guru, Pani Pita, Mata Dhart Mahat, Bara Maha, celebrating all the seasons. Some of it very sensuous as well, the poetry. And, this is just a homage to his love for nature. These little miniatures are in a tiny collection now, a museum in Delhi. Pai Lalo, the carpenter who Nanak visits instead of Malik Bhago. These images, if they are to be rendered not in a calendar fashion by a contemporary artist, you need that black space to highlight the blood and the milk. It's a 6-foot work. My works are very, very large, unlike the miniatures, which are the inspiration. So there's the calendar images we've all grown up with, but it's a challenge to, therefore, give them one's own interpretation. Nanak was a traveler. The work is in Chandigarh Museum. It's a 5-foot work. And traveled, we know, I've been to Baghdad also in '86 while the bombs were falling, and there was a little Gurdwara there. So I've been to even Ladakh, from, where there's this little Gurdwara, and above Sikkim, Gangtok, where the China border begins. He's called Nanak Lama. In Ladakh, you'll find stones where he visited, and Lama Nanak was here in so-and-so year. So where didn't he go? Peer Nanak, Guru Nanak, Lama Nanak, he was to everybody their own. This from the Kapani collection, the footprint that he left everywhere that he went, the traveler with the stick. When I went up to that 22,000 feet where it crossed into Tibet and China, there's a lake called Dongma Lake. And part of that lake, I went through the army because civilians weren't allowed at that time. And part of that lake never freezes because the locals said there's no tree there. They said, we have no source of water, this lake freezes. So he put his dung, that's why it's called Dangmar, Soti, and that portion never freezes. So I stood in that cold water with tears streaming down my face, and when I came back, I did this work that is with Dr. Kapani. Sultanpur Lodi, another place I go to frequently, is 2.5 hours from Amritsar by road. It's where he enters water and comes out and says Ek Kumkar Satnam for the first time. It's a 12 by 6 foot triptych. And, you see the elements of water inspired by our miniatures. And then he also says, Na ko Hindu, na Musalman. So in Sultanpur Lodi is where, after his father slapped him, he went to live with his sister, where he was married, where he joined the Modi Khana, and then began his udasis with Mardana. from the Kapani collection, the immersion in water that happened in Sultanpur Lodi. That's the first part of the diptych. So he's escaped the net of, the world for a while, but then he goes back to the world because, as he tells the Nath yogis, we have to live in this world and do whatever we can. Goes to Mecca, puts his feet in the other direction, and then they say, you are not revering Mecca. He says, put my feet where God is not. So these are all very large works. Mardana, who always walked in his footstep, Rabab utha Mardania Bani aayi hai. It's an illustration for Khushwant Singh's book, because Ola Gurbani, which is so poetic, which infuses our being, and it's all set in verse. It's little paperwork, illustrations for hymns of the Sikh Gurus. Nanak in bleeding times, because our times are so violent now. Inspired by a miniature in the Kapani collection, which I saw many, many years back in a reproduction, in a calendar they did, Death of Mardana, where I imagined Nanak consigning Mardana's rabab to the flames as well. And another illustration for Khushwant's daughter's book for children, Nanak the Guru. Penguin has published Khushwant Singh's book, which is now out of print, and they are reprinting it. When we had a big discussion on not using this painting because it had this was with the 9th Guru's verses, Guru Tegh Bahadur's, and they said there's a flaming corpse. So I said, every Sikh who dies, this has to be sung, Ram gayo, Ravan gayo, Jako Bo Parvar. So and I, of course, fought my way through, and this was finally published with the hymns of the 9th Guru. And, Nanak in the dark night, he would always say, Pinni ranadiye chamkan tare, jage sant jana, mil Ram pyare. We come to another kind of dark night that we witnessed and lived through in 1984, and actually saw these pictures. 3,500 dragged out of their homes, not a riot, but a genocide. I'm sorry to impose these on you, but this generation, and I keep showing them in all my laptops that I do in schools and colleges, should not forget. Because before that, one never felt marginalized in a way, And then suddenly one was thrown out of one's house by the landlord, and you were working in the relief camps day and night, and, suddenly you felt different. And I'm sorry about these pictures. About 50 army people in different trains, because our manager was on that train from Calcutta, were dragged out of trains. So how to catharsize that pain out of the being? I did a series which Al-Ghazi had the courage to show in his gallery in Delhi called World Goes On. So that blood-smeared beard on the arrows. And this exhibition, apart from Delhi, went to Bombay next year and Calcutta. It was very painful to do, but there was no other way of expressing, anguish. Recently, there was a retrospective in National Gallery of Modern Art, Bangalore, and they used this on the banner. It's a 9-foot work and flames around the person. And Bhisham Pitame, we know, lay on a bed of arrows. So the suffering separates the onlookers from the suffering person. So the whole series was called World Goes On. And I also began to use, I'd never painted death, I'd never seen death on such a scale. So I began to use the drowning figure as a metaphor for death, and others just going about their business and looking away, which is what happened. My mother and Dr. Kapani fought over the ownership of this work, and my mother won. And after Dr. Kapani came back, it fell off the wall and developed a little tear. So I told her maybe it would have been better off there. These are all part of the same series. This is here in the Kapani home, the wound, when Christ opens his garment to show the wound. It's a difficult work, and nobody would have picked it up but Dr. Kapani, because it's very difficult to live with these kind of works. There were very few takers for them when the show happened. And later, when you build a slight reputation, then people want the 1984 works, and then you don't want to let them go. A lot of Sikhs had to cut their hair. A lot of people in my own family and family friends. It's called Smoldering City. And having done this work, I went to Alchi, a monastery in Ladakh, and I saw, this is called racial unconscious, the same posture of Buddha cutting his hair with a sword and same kind of colors, and that was 6th century. In where we'd adopted a family of 5 orphans, where they resettled the widows colony, there was an old man sitting on the road with his machine and stitching these beautiful, sensuous women's garments. And he was making a living, and he was like the maker himself, trying to come out of the ashes of that period. When India turned 50, I remembered my grandfather who brought the Guru Granth Sahib on his head during partition. And I did these lions at the back because he went back to rescue his old parents and in-laws who were still trapped in Lahore. And the Granth Sahib we read every day is the same Granth Sahib, and he brought this bundle of memories on his back. In 1947, I did a lot of Bhagat Singhs also and Udham Singh, because I felt contemporary artists had probably ignored these heroes. It's called Lions. And this is the Kabir series, which made Marianne on her first visit to Delhi. This was in 1993. It was showing at the Art Council Gallery, and she suddenly walked in, and it was the opening. And that's how we became friends with the Kabir series. Kabir weaving water, because water is harmony, and we are always in conflict. Communal conflict in India is a searing problem. And he, of course, was beyond all this. Sun samad mein bunat hamari, hamra jhagda raha na ko, kazi mulla chhade do. So there was a whole series of 33 works shown 25 years ago. Body is just a garment. Sukh dukh jive kapde pehre aaye manuk. This is his birthplace in Varanasi, which is still the same. It's the same innocent pond where he was found, same untouched even today. Body is just a garment. I put my little Bhagat Singh and my little Gandhi and Netaji Bose also within that figure. The love story I've chosen, particularly images related to the subject of the day, although I do other subjects also. One of my favorites is time, day and night. And also I do a lot of work on environment, because Delhi, unlike Sunny Anand Stanford, is a horrible now mess, And so I do a lot of environment paintings. I've done many free murals. And believe it or not, I'm in the court every month fighting for some tree cause or the other in our area, government chopping trees, land mafia grabbing public park and all. It's my Sikh blood. It's a huge waste of time, because one case has been going on since 16 years against a guy who's grabbed a public park in our area and having 8 weddings a night, and the government is with him. So nobody else goes in the neighborhood. My mother used to go. Now that she's not able to, I go and sit in the court for hours. So this is Sohni Mahiwal, the love story, and the love arrow is depicted thus in the corner of the painting in an old Rajasthani where Cupid is riding this parrot with many female figures. That's the Cupid. So, and the hunting scene at the back, there's one kind of arrow that kills and the other, that's the love arrow. And her posture is very deliberately Nensuk Soni, which is hanging in Banaras Hindu University Museum and is published in Dr. Goswami's book, and I've seen it hanging there. Museums don't, unfortunately, document their collections in India. So wherever you go, and the miniatures keep vanishing, Alvar, BHU, everywhere. So to see this book is truly a delight, which came to us last night. From the Kapani collection, Sohni Mahiwal, and the plug kind of contemporizes the story, because in the Sufi tradition, love connects you to God, Ishq Mazhabi and Ishq Hakiki. And I've always tried to contemporize the story. She fell in love, so here she is falling in love. And you cannot measure love, so it's called love beyond measure. She was actually a real person who was born, I've been to her birthplace in Akhnur near Jammu on the Pakistan border, and I stood in that very Chenab which she used to cross. It's a very swift and cold river. Love beyond measure. And she's an epitome of human courage, because she could have just sat. Some people can still just sit back and bask in the laurels of their, say, earnings or comforts, or, and some people have to take a plunge. Some people move beyond fiber optics. So they are there for Sohni. So there's a big diptych, it's 14-foot diptych, and she's so popular in folk imagination and in Bollywood films that I've done the Bombay Marine Drive lights at the back. I like writing also on the work sometimes, because that angular gives a visual tension with the organic figures. The story is that he used to bake fish for her when she used to cross the river. And one day he didn't find fish, so he cut a piece of his thigh. And then she began to swim across the river. And the exhibition, the last exhibition of Sohni, where I made this river of pigment, and everybody who entered the gallery had to cross the river and therefore become Sohni. That's the end. Thank you.